Mmm. Hello, frothy goodness. Hello, and welcome to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance, and I hope you are as well. Much love to all you lovelies who keep coming back, and if you're new to my channel, very warm welcome to you. I hope everybody is doing very well. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the books that I read in the second half of April, which I'm sorry to say isn't much. I only have, I believe, 4 books to talk to you about. I don't know what happened. Well, I do know what happened in the second half of April. Just life happened, because in the first half of April, I read a ridiculous amount, I think 9. Even though I don't have a ton of books to talk to you about, I feel like I have a lot to chat with you about. So this might be more of a chatty video. If I think about it when I'm editing, maybe I'll put a timestamp of when I actually start talking about books, but I just wanted to share with you what's been going on. I did mention to you in my last video that I got hired at an independent bookstore, so I started work this past week and I'm absolutely loving it. I will say, as I'm walking through the store, my biggest challenge is going to be just distraction, like, oh, what's that? And oh, what's that? That happens. But other than that, it is a fairly popular independent bookstore in downtown Savannah. Lots of tourists come through there. There are 4 shop cats that live in the store. We have Skimbleshanks, we have Bartleby, we have Mr. Elliot, and we have Morticia. I will put up a picture of Skimbleshanks, which is the short hair cat, and I believe I have a picture of Mr. Elliot, who is a Maine Coon cat. He's quite impressive. A lot of people come into the store looking for the cats. They're always either laying in the window, or some people like make a game out of searching for the cats. So that's super fun. But I've been enjoying myself, but it's kept me a little bit busy. It gets me out of the house a little bit more. Oh, and I also wanted to talk to you. I learned about one of the perks of the job, which is so great. But in the back of the shop, there's this huge shelf, and they're all ARCs. It's a huge shelf, and it's in order of months of publication. And so we have books that are being published in May all the way through November. So I'm hoping to once I get caught up with the reading that I need to do, we're actually required to read an ARC per month. And it says required, like, you don't have to ask me twice. I'll be happy to read an ARC, but that's going to be super fun, and I'll be super excited to bring those new books to you. In addition to having to read an ARC, we are required to review one on a website that is provided through the store. Maybe you've heard about it. It's called Edelweiss. We're supposed to put a review online, and I might actually turn those reviews into videos here. I don't know how each of you would like just dedicated review videos. If you have any thoughts on that, if that's something that you want to see, I'd be happy to hear about it. Please, if you would just comment down below, and I might just do it anyway. Who knows? That's a super great benefit that I'm super excited about for this new job. What else has been going on? Let's see. We finally got our fence finished in the backyard. It was supposed to take 2 days. It took 4 days. So there was somebody here almost the entire week. I couldn't be more thrilled. Fence doesn't sound like much, but we have dogs, and we like to take them for a walk every day, usually after dinner, but with no fence, we would have to walk them 3 times a day on leash, and it's just a little time consuming. They loved it, but they also like to run around and dog in the yard off leash, and I'm just so thrilled that they're able to do that now, and now it's just less time consuming. I can let them out and do something else, whatever. It's so nice. But that was an ongoing stressful process. We had to battle with the city that we live in for permits because of easements that we have in the backyard. We had to battle with our homeowners association for the same reason, and we just had to get both the city and the association on the same page. And then my fence company had to make sure everything was lined up. It took just over 2 months for the whole process, from the time I got an estimate and measurement till the time they finished the fence. It was over 2 months, and it was stressful with all the phone calls, and it was something that was always on my mind, and it did affect my reading a little bit, but now that's done, so that's good news. Buy a house, they said. It would be fun, they said. Also, my husband has been home for the past couple of weeks. The job that brought us to this area just didn't work out. He didn't like it at all. He's already got a new job. As a matter of fact, today is his first day going into his new job. But from the time he left the old job, he's been home for 2 weeks. So he's been home for every day, and I just can't record with him in the house. I know I should probably learn to get past that, but for some reason I just feel weird recording when I'm talking to you and I have somebody in the background. I just couldn't do it. In the past, what we would do is I would send him on an errand, or I'd send him on a motorcycle ride so I could record, and he's totally understandable with that. But he's been home for the past 2 weeks, but now he's back to work and I will have more time to record and read. We have our reading hour too. We like to spend what we call cocktail hour, the hour before we start getting ready for dinner, where we'll either sit on the couch or we'll sit on the back porch and we'll read. He likes to read too. And then we also read at bedtime. But I usually get a little bit more reading time when he's not here during the daytime. We had 3 of my 4 stepsons up for the weekend. And so from Friday until Sunday, forget about it. There's no free time. So it's just been a busy couple of weeks. And as you may or may not have noticed, I didn't do a TBR video for May. And that was for 2 reasons. My TBR that I did for April, total fail. I think I read 1 book for my TBR video. The reading that I've been doing the past couple of months has been kind of, well, self-imposed required reading because I signed up for the Booktube prize. I had 6 books to read for February and March. And then with the women's prize, I really wanted to get through the long list, 16 books before the shortlist was announced. That didn't quite happen, but I still got through 13 of them. 11 if you don't include the 2 DNFs. So there's been a few months of books that I've set for myself, and I decided that May is going to be completely mood reading. And I just found out this morning that that's actually a thing. There's a thing that people call May mood reading May. So that works out perfectly. So all the books that I'm going to read in May are just what I want to read at the time. So I decided to forego a TBR video for May, but it'll probably be back for June. The final thing that I want to talk about before I get on to my wrap up is the Women's Prize for Fiction. I had a couple of you had mentioned that you were hoping for a reaction video, and I decided not to do a dedicated reaction video because I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about it, and I didn't want to just do a dedicated video that was only going to be maybe 3 or 4 minutes long. So I'm going to take those 3 or 4 minutes and just put it here. So my reaction to the shortlist, I'm actually quite pleased with the shortlist. There was only 1 book that made it to the shortlist that wasn't on either my prediction or my wish list, and that was Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. I read that one. I thought it was okay. I'm not surprised that it made it to the shortlist. It's written in that way that I think is just women's prizey. I am surprised that I'm a Fan didn't make it to the shortlist, only because, now I didn't read that one, only because of all the talk. I mean, it got just as much talk, I think, as Demon Copperhead did. There were a lot of people who expected it to make the shortlist. I am, however, shocked and disappointed that Wandering Souls didn't make the shortlist. I am quite sad about that one. I think it absolutely deserved to make the short list, but what can you do? I mean, you make the long list as a debut author. I think that's pretty impressive. I'll go ahead and pop up my wish list for the short list here. As you can see, 3 of the 6 from my wish list made it, and I'm super happy about that. And then here was my short list prediction. And I got 4 out of the 6 correct. Yay me. And interestingly enough, I even predicted Black Butterflies to make the short list without having read it yet. It's on order, it's on its way because I can't find it anywhere. So I will be reading that one in May. So spoiler alert for a TBR. Demon Copperhead, no surprise. Marriage Portrait, absolutely no surprise. Fire Rush, I'm not surprised about that too. The one thing I do want to talk about, though, as far as my reaction to the Women's Prize shortlist, is more so my reaction to other people's reactions to the shortlist. I watched a couple of people's reactions, and I was a little mortified by the absolute rage that people experienced that Pod made the shortlist. And I'm a little bit saddened by how upset people were that Pod made the shortlist. I watched a couple of videos where people were downright insulting towards Pod and Pod's author, Laylene Paul. And I just, I understand where when you follow a prize like this and you have your favorites and you have books that you believe will make the shortlist or you believe warrant moving on in the process. But the bottom line is all these books on the long list, they're well written. Whether you like the style or not, whether you like the story or not, they're well written books. To be so insulting about a book that moves on in the process that you disagree with, I just found that bad form. Like, as an example, a lot of people expected Glory to make the shortlist. I would have been bummed if Glory made the shortlist, because then, it's a book that I DNF'd and it just wasn't for me. And I would have been, say, disappointed just because it wasn't my favorite. But I never would have said anything derogatory towards the book or said anything with the feeling of, oh, that book doesn't deserve to even be on this list at all, or anything like that. Glory just wasn't for me. Does it deserve to be on this list? Yes, absolutely. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole of disappointment in other readers and other booktubers who were just so nasty about Pod. I think you get my point, right? So, am I biased because I loved Pod? Maybe, but I want to believe that even if a book that just wasn't my favorite, I would still be supportive of women writers. So that's my reaction. That's more my reaction to reactions. Overall, I'm actually pretty pleased with the short list. Like I said, I have one book to read that I will be reading before the winner is announced. And again, I'm super excited to be going to the live show, the festival that's being held in London in June. I'm hoping to vlog that for you all. But that's enough on the Women's Prize. That's my reaction. Let's get into the books that I read in the second half of April. So just a recap and some stats. The first half of April, I DNF'd Glory. I read My Evil Mother, The Best Girls, Wandering Souls, Trespasses, Berserker, Stone Blind, The Thursday Murder Club, and Homesick. Very, very heavy on the Women's Prize for Fiction there. If you include the DNFs for the entire month of April, I read 13 books. But of those 13 books, I had 9 women authors, which isn't a surprise, 4 men, and then 4 people of color. My star ratings were kind of all over the place. Again, the 2 DNFs, I had 1 2-star book, 3 3-stars, 3 3.5 stars, 3 4-stars, and 1 5-star book. The 1 5-star book I've already talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, and that was Wandering Souls by Cecile Penn. Absolutely loved that book. Completely gutted it didn't make the short list, but I'll live. I will link my mid-month wrap-up down below if you wanted to hear more of my thoughts on those books that I read in the first half of the month. So the first book that I attempted to read in the second half of April was Cursed Bread by Sophie McIntosh. This is another Women's Prize for Fiction book, and this was a DNF for me. I gave it probably 75, 80 pages. Maybe even a little bit more. I want to say I got to the halfway point. It's not a very long book. I thought I would be able to get through it. I felt pretty early on that I was probably going to DNF it, but then considering the length of the book, I thought I'd push through. Nope, couldn't do it. I was bored. I didn't like the writing style. The whole stream of consciousness thing just doesn't mesh with me. This is a book that's based on an actual event that happened in France in the 50s in a small village, a mass poisoning, and I thought it was going to be more about that event. It's not. It's more a book about obsession. This follows Elodie, who is the wife of the town baker. This couple comes to town and they're a very eccentric couple, and Elodie becomes obsessed with them. And the story goes from there. It didn't grab me. I didn't really care for Elodie as a character. I didn't see what Elodie saw in the couple that she was obsessed with, so I didn't really connect with anybody. I feel like this was another book that just wasn't what it said on the label. I had the same experience with The Dog of the North by Elizabeth Mackenzie, another book on the long list. Like that one, Cursed Bread was one that I was really excited to read because I thought it was just going to be kind of more thrillery, kind of a literary thriller, and it just wasn't. I was not engaged, unfortunately. And I was just really, really bummed about it. I was borderline angry because I bought this book hardcover, brand new from Barnes & Noble. And by the time I DNF'd it, it had only been a few days and I returned that book. I rarely return books, you guys, but I was a little peeved. You know me, I rarely buy hardcovers. So to buy a hardcover brand new at Barnes & Noble, big corporate bookstore, you know, it takes a lot for me to do those things. So if I'm going to do all that and then not like the book, I want my money back. So sad to say, Cursed Bread was a DNF. The next book I read was Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks. This was of course, another long listed book and now a shortlisted book. I listened to this book. It was excellently narrated and there was actual music on the audio that I very much enjoyed, This book follows Yamé. She is of Jamaican heritage. She's living in London and this story spans between 1978 and 1981. Yamé is a young woman who is all about going out on the weekend. Her and her friends go to a dance club almost every weekend, if not every weekend, called The Crypt. And it's where a lot of her peers go to dance and they just have a good time. It's her and her friend Rumor and her friend Asase. Asase? I think it's Asase. And they're just all about having a good time every weekend. Yamé doesn't really have a whole lot of ambition in life, except for she really loves the music scene and she kind of wants to be a DJ, like a big time DJ. And she's got skills, but we're in a time where it's not really something that women do or is accepted that women do. So it talks a lot about her struggle with wanting to do that, but of course, the oppression at the time, it's not looking good for her. Then one night, Yamé meets Moose, and he is a young, ambitious, talented carpenter, and they fall in love. And I think it's through Moose that Yamé starts to believe in herself a little bit more and starts to develop a little bit more ambition for life. And she starts to really come into her own. But then Moose dies in a tragic event, and Yamé is kind of left spiraling. She becomes involved with a man named Manasseh, who is involved in criminal and gang activity. And Yamé just loses herself and she finds herself distanced from her friends and distanced from her father, who she already has a fractured relationship with. And the story goes from there. I enjoyed the storyline enough. The problems that I had with it, with the narration, there was a lot of Jamaican slang used that I had a little hard time following. Of course, in the context, you kind of pick up what is trying to be said, but I don't like having that struggle, and there was quite a bit of it. There's also a little bit of the writing style that, I mean, there was a lot in this book that I really, really loved. There was some lyrical prose that was absolutely beautiful that I really liked, but then there was other parts that I didn't love as much. There were some times where the sentences were short and choppy to kind of convey urgency, and there was just too much of it. And then there was a level of descriptiveness that I thought was beautiful at some points of the story and then too much at other points of the story. I mean, you really get an idea of the whole music scene and the dance club scene, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But then there were just other parts where I don't need that much description to tell me what the surroundings look like, especially if the surroundings just aren't as important to what's happening in the story at the time. So I guess I would say I'm a little picky about that, but just in case you're as picky as I am. The one other thing that I'll say about this book that I just thought was strange is it didn't feel like this story took place in the late 70s, early 80s. I feel like if I wasn't told that that was the time frame, I would have imagined it in the recent history, if not present day. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, if everything that was going on in this story is still very relevant. I would just say that I was a little disappointed just because I wanted it to feel like it was the late 70s, early 80s. And it just didn't. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It just was for me. Overall, I just thought it was a good story. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I gave Fire Rush 3 stars. The next book I read was 13 by Steve Kavanaugh. I had the pleasure of buddy reading this book with the lovely Nikki over at Red Dot Reads. She's a booktuber who is over in Singapore, and if you haven't checked out her channel, please do so. But Nikki and I have buddy read before. We have a really good time, and we had a really, really good time with this book. We both enjoyed it very much. This is a mystery thriller, kind of courtroom drama, very kind of John Grisham-esque, but a little bit more on the thriller side. Funnily enough, this is the fourth in the Eddie Flynn series, but from what I understand, you don't have to read these in any order. I didn't feel lost at all, but I think the fourth, 13, this book is one of the most popular in the series. And Eddie Flynn, of course, is the main character. Eddie Flynn is an attorney. He is a former con man. He's got all sorts of personal issues, as many protagonists do. But he finds himself hired on to help with this case of Bobby, who is a very popular actor who's been accused of murdering his wife and his wife's lover. At the same time, you're following a character by the name of Joshua Kane, who not only is a serial killer, but he is trying to get on Bobby's jury, and he does so successfully. I don't want to spoil any of this story, so that's all I'm going to tell you about the plot. I will say it is a very, very pacey story. Chapters are short. It's fast-paced throughout the entire book. You are following dual perspective. You're following Eddie's perspective, which is in the first person, and you're also following Kane's perspective, but it's in the third person. And the whole story takes place inside of a week. So each section is a day of the week, starting with Sunday or Monday, I can't remember, and ending on Friday. So very, very fast, very easy to read, very accessible, very well written. I thought there was a couple of twists in there as well that I thought to be very fun. And one of the conversations that Nikki and I had was how often we would give a thriller 5 stars. I rarely give 5 stars to thrillers. And same thing with Nikki. The one that comes to mind is Razorblade Tears, 5 stars all the way. But the thing with Razorblade Tears is that also had a heart. There was a lot more than the whole thriller aspect to Razorblade Tears. There was the whole relationship between Buddy Lee and Ike, and then there was the father-son dynamic. There was just a lot more depth to that thriller mystery that deserved that 5th star for me. This one didn't really have that heart, and I'm not taking away from the thriller aspect of it or the enjoyment that I had with this book, but while it had that good pacey feel to it, and while it had that all the elements that make a really good thriller mystery, I gave 13 4 stars. And finally, the last book that I read in the month of April was Ozark Dogs by Eli Craner. This is another mystery thriller that has Razorblade Tears vibes to it. I listened to this and it was very well narrated. I absolutely enjoyed this book. The audiobook was narrated by the author. He did a fantastic job. And he is from the Ozarks, so that lent to the authenticity of telling this story. This follows Jeremiah, who is a Vietnam vet, and he is raising his granddaughter, Joanna. Joanna's father, Jeremiah's son, is in prison for killing a teammate. And what I mean by teammate is they played high school football together. The teammate was also his friend, and I can't remember the teammate's name, but he was a member of a family who is in the drug trade in the same town. That teammate's brother, Evale, wants revenge on Jeremiah's family. And so he has this plan to kidnap Jo, who is a junior or senior in high school, and do bad things to her. And the story goes from there. This one wasn't as pacey as Razorblade Tears, but it was pacey enough. But this was also just as much character driven as Razorblade Tears is. And I really, really enjoyed this. You really get into Jeremiah's character. There's this family drama. There's family history within each family and then between the two families. That was extremely riveting. The relationship between Jeremiah and his granddaughter Jo is just lovely. I absolutely loved that dynamic. As I was listening to this book, I knew it was going to be highly rated for me. I enjoyed it the whole way through, and even without the delicious twist at the end, it would have been a highly rated book. The only reason it didn't get that 5th star for me is there was a point in the beginning where I kind of had a hard time following who was who and how they were connected to each other. I feel like the author dropped the ball a little bit as far as just setting those characters and creating that foundation where the reader just knows who everybody is and how they connect to each other. And then once that sits in your mind, then you can kind of follow and enjoy the rest of the story. So I feel like that was a little bit of a weak point at the beginning, but between the 1/3 point and the halfway point, it kind of clicked, and then I was able to enjoy it. But up until that point, I was a little bit adrift. But I don't want that to dissuade you from reading this book. This was a good time. You don't know what's going to happen, and a lot goes down, and there's action, and there's heart, and it was just an enjoyable read. I really enjoyed his writing style. I enjoyed the content, and anything that gives me Razor Blade Tears vibes is going to be a highlight for me. I gave Ozark Dogs a 4 stars. That is it. Those are the rest of the books that I read in April. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? What have you been reading recently? I would love to hear about it. Or you can just say hi down in the doodly-doo. If you're still watching at this point, please consider giving that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be wonderful. As per usual, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.